Okay, so this project started off, the idea was to introduce Iranian music and culture to British school children. I had this idea that it would be really interesting to do something based around Iran, Iranian music, and particularly in the current political climate, or when I say current, that's been going on for a few years, to introduce children to aspects of Iran that perhaps they wouldn't get from the mainstream media.
Dr. Lauda Nushin from the department here cold called me out of the blue. In fact, I hadn't even started. It was a week before I took up the post, and the call got forwarded on to me. And she had an idea because she'd brought her, as I understand it, used to bring her family when they were younger to our family concerts, the Philharmonics concerts. And she'd heard some pieces by a composer called Brendan Beals, which at the time had been concentrating on a Finnish epic poem called the Kalevala. When she was then kind of thinking about bringing the Shahnameh out to a kind of younger audience and exploring the potential of it to kind of reach younger people and kind of everything else, that she remembered those pieces. And she rang up to talk about whether there was mileage in creating a similar kind of work based on the Shahnameh.
We knew quite early on that we wanted to have a narrative thread as part of this piece, something that would give a storytelling structure to the piece. And in fact, the concert, in the end, the theme of the concert turned out to be telling stories through music. The most appropriate body of literature to turn to seemed to be the Shahnameh, which is the great epic poem of Iran, which is about 1,000 years old and was written by a poet called Ferdowsi, but he drew on a whole body of oral literature that was already existing. He compiled this epic poem which it tells the story of Iran spanning several centuries.
One of the first things that I felt was crucial to the success of the project was to identify the right composer for the piece. David Bruce is a composer I have known for many years, professionally. I know his music well. I've performed some of his music as a performer. And I knew that, I felt instinctivally he would be the right person for the piece.
When I met with Laudan from City University, one of the first things she did was give me a huge bag full of CDs of all shapes and sizes, and also several really interesting books, academic books on Iranian music. I was particularly interested in the fact that there were quite a lot of diverse different styles within Iran.
And we introduced David to a storyteller and writer called Sally Pom Clayton, who has kind of done work for the LPO before with other composers. And she knows the Shahnameh very well. She has she's written books and text for the British Museum on the Shahnameh and has a kind of great history. And because she's a performer and she comes from that kind of oral tradition of storytelling, she's kind of perfect for it.
So that was really where the whole thing started, was Sally produced her version of the poem in a format that would be accessible for Key Stage 2 children. An 8-minute version of it that would form the basis of the piece that David Bruce would later write, that was to be narrated as part of the piece. So a little bit like Peter and the Wolf, for example.
We knew we wanted to invite the Bridge Project to be involved. That's 2 schools, so that's about 50 young violin players and their teachers, and the teachers is an important part of it.
The Bridge Project is under Music Masters Education Initiative, and we work in 3 partner schools at the moment with over 350 children on long-term instrumental tuition for children from very diverse, financially disadvantaged backgrounds.
And so for many, many children in London, and we reach about 15,000 a year, it's their first experiences of hearing and seeing an orchestra. Many might come from families who wouldn't consider taking them to a concert themselves.
Have you ever seen any instruments like you did in that assembly?
No. It's a key time in their time in the Bridge Project is in year 2, when they get to do this project with the LPO, because they've worked with them on different occasions. In year 1 they get the chance to go to a rehearsal, and they sit amongst the orchestra rehearsing, so they get to see the different instruments and how the orchestra work together. and then they're building up to this time in the second year of learning the violin to get to actually perform with them, and it's such an exciting time and really marks how far they've progressed over the time in the project.
And each kind of pair of concerts, because there's 2 in a day, is dedicated to a particular key stage of the national curriculum. So this was dedicated to Key Stage 2, and we've also done Key Stage 1, Key Stage 3 and GCSE.
So we were very keen to involve as many students from City University as possible, and our Middle Eastern ensemble, which is led by Faribor's Kiani, was able to be involved in various ways, both in the school's workshops and in the final performance.
And so to start that off, we just got together as a huge group at the Royal Festival Hall one morning, just to kind of introduce each other, meet each other, learn a bit about Iranian music, about Iranian modes, learn a bit about working methods, about workshop methods, which I led, I suppose, and introduced people to how I might work with the young people just to facilitate music making in a group context.
And that was the text that we then took into the schools. That was all we had at that stage. We had the text of the story, we had various musical ideas that we got the children to play around with, and David as composer was involved right from the beginning. So he participated in the school's workshops. He was involved in, so the children, for example, were asked to, with the violins, they're all violinists, they were asked to convey through music, for example, what the Mountain of Gems, which is where the Seymour live, would sound like, or the sounds of the soldiers' horses taking Prince Earl to leave in the mountains.
So I was kind of gathering a few influences, a rhythm from here and maybe a melodic pattern from there, and trying to sort of juggle these into something that would make sense across this 10-minute, 15-minute piece.
One of the issues in music education at primary school, of course, is that the amount of music that happens in the classroom or in the school is often very dependent on who you've got on the staff, how much musical expertise they have. You may be fortunate enough to have a music specialist in the primary school, but you equally may not. And for those teachers who don't have musical expertise, often it's not so much a problem. It's not so much that they don't have the expertise, but it's actually having the confidence to do actually quite what we might consider as quite simple activities. So I think a session like that, and we had a whole range of classroom instruments, xylophones and various percussion instruments and so on that they were working with, and we were taking sort of small rhythmic ideas or melodic ideas, and they were sort of responding to each other, and they really, by the end of the session, both of the sessions, I got a sense that they felt much more that this was something they could actually take into the classroom and do practically with the children in a way that perhaps they wouldn't have had the confidence to do that beforehand.
Let's look at how the modes are built up, how the rhythms are built up. Can they make up their own rhythms? Can they sort of put together their own pieces? Can they make up a bit of story themselves? Can they draw some pictures? And in that respect as well, we sort of ticked all the boxes of, cross-curricular, getting literacy and numeracy in there as well, because it's sort of with the rhythms, it's all about counting and, 3 plus 3 plus 2 to get the right rhythms and things.
And then we also introduced the story to the whole school in an assembly.
So I'm going to introduce Sally to you, wherever she is. Here she is. It's Sally. Can you say hello to Sally? Hello, Sally.
Sally performed the text as it then was with Faribor's and Arash, and just with them kind of freely improvising.
I remember one moment particularly when Sally was describing the Simorg and said that it had, red wings and a golden beak and a golden tail, and the whole audience went, "Ah!"
The Simorg is the size of 30 birds, shines like 100 suns, lives for 1,000 years, then bursts into flames. Out of the ashes, a new bird is born.
So that was fascinating, and that kind of gave us great heart, because then we realised we were onto a winner, because it's clearly a fantastic story and clearly something that would really appeal to people of that age.
And it was a nice moment as well, I think, for the children to work with adults and young people from outside of their sphere, be that school or home. And it's just quite an encouraging and validating thing to have young professionals come into your school space and say, you know, I want to invest in you for the next kind of 2 hours because, you know, I think what we're doing is fun. And you know what's really exciting? This is crazy. He is writing a piece of music for you to play. Did you know that? What? He is writing a piece of music for you to play on your violins. The children on the Bridge project learn a version of the Suzuki method, which is combined with elements of Kadai and Dalcroze and other contemporary teaching methods. It gives them a really strong performance ethic, and it really helps to train their ears. They have a very well developed ear. And for the first couple of years, the notation learning that they do happens in parallel to their instrumental learning. But for the Prince Czar project, they learned all of the music from memory.
A little melodic fragment I worked on became Zal's theme. I think the first use of it that I had actually created was for the sort of lullaby when the baby, when we first meet Prince Zal, and this became the tune because it's a very sort of easy A major tune, which was one of the requirements for the violinists to be able to play.
He had to work out how to use those young violin players, because if you're writing a piece where an orchestra is telling a story and you introduce 50 new instruments, there has to be a kind of dramatic reason for that happening, otherwise it's kind of superfluous. And he alighted on the idea that the young violin players would represent the young Prince Czar, that kind of age relation thing. And so what he ended up writing them was in essence a lullaby that the Queen sings to the baby prince. And a tune that then becomes kind of representative of the prince, and when he's lonely in the mountains and abandoned, it comes back then as well.
From the outset of the rehearsals, really, it became apparent that the music was very well written for the children. They were able to learn it quickly and then enjoy playing it because it was under their fingers.
The real value of having the university, City University, involved in the project as well was bringing such different diverse elements to the collaboration that we haven't quite seen before. I mean, bringing in Iranian musicians and a lot of the video work and the media that and the students and everyone that came in just provided so many different types of role models.
We have a sort of big rehearsal either the day before or 2 days before of that week. When at Henry Wood Hall, where the orchestra rehearse to get the orchestra together, and then any extra people that are involved. So I think that was the first time we had the orchestra, Sally, the storyteller, Arash and Fariborz, Loudon was there with the City players, the Bridge project with children were there, and then David Angus, the conductor, he was there for the first time, sort of meeting the children as well.
The premiere of Prince Zal took place in one of our Bright Sparks concerts, which is one of our concerts for schools, free concerts for schools at the Festival Hall.
Well, it was extremely exciting for us, myself and the students, to be on the same platform. I mean, coming to the concert now, actually to be sitting on the stage of the Festival Hall with the orchestra was extremely exciting.
Yeah, for the children, I think it can be a little bit nerve-wracking. I mean, they're very young. Often they'll just go with stuff like, brilliant, this is what we're doing today. But I think it's for anybody, it's daunting to walk out on stage like that. To receive that kind of rapturous applause, it does put you on edge.
It was about children hearing about a country thousands of miles away that they normally get nothing but negative coverage of. And actually to have somebody stand on the stage, the introducer, Andy Barclay, who did a fantastic job, talking about this music coming from Iran, and for children actually to hear that word that, you know, not attached to a whole bunch of negative things, I think was really important.
Now, we're going to meet a couple of musicians who are actually Iranian musicians. One is Fariborz Kiani. There's Fariborz. Now, Fariborz is going to play two instruments, two drums. One's called a tombak, and the other is called a daf.
I think it's very hard to explain how it feels to make music within such a large ensemble and to feel like you're contributing something of worth at such an important moment. And for the children, you know, from these schools and at this age, it's the kind of memory that stays with you forever. And so they're really excited about it, and they have a great time.
So we've got cameras that you can see in the festival hall and see the audience, and the children's faces just sort of staring wide-eyed at Sally's storytelling.
Weeks, months, years passed. And then at last, the Queen held a bundle in her arms. "Here is our baby boy," she said. King Saul was filled with joy. "I named my son Zal, Prince Zal." Zal put his father's hand and clasped it tight. The years of misery were gone.
But in the questions we then asked the audience and from schools, and we got replies from about a third of the schools replied to us. The response was really very, very positive.
Because when I wrote the teacher's resource, I had no idea who was going to be using this in the classroom. Would busy primary school teachers actually take the time to read through this and do activities with the children in the classroom? So you produce this pack, and it went on the LPO's website, and then it kind of there's no feedback formally. But having done the follow-up, the few forms that we've had back so far have been incredibly positive and enthusiastic, and it seems that teachers have taken the trouble not only to use the pack, but to link in with other kinds of curricular activities like visual arts, for example. So one of the teachers said that they'd done a project where the children had painted their own Seymours, or another one mentioned linking up with the maths curriculum because of the rhythmic patterns and the additive patterns, where you'd say you get a pattern of a 7-beat cycle that's 3 + 2 + 2. So those sort of ways of linking there with numeracy and so on.
This has been a very successful project for us on many levels, and I think it's been a real highlight of what we do. We've been running the Bridge project now for 4 years, which isn't a lot of time, and this felt to me like a really excellent coming together of some of our key partners and some of our new friends and new partners. So I'm delighted with how it's gone.
So one of the follow-up activities which we were able to do was that in the autumn of 2012, David actually came to City University and over a series of 3 workshops worked with our second and third year undergraduate composition students around Sally's original text.
Can we just look at the end of that verse in terms of what actually happens? Does the glockenspiel, once it's in, stay in the text?
In some ways it was written with a younger audience in mind, so an audience of children, but I think David is quite keen that it doesn't just get sort of pigeonholed into being music for children. He feels that it could appeal as much to an adult audience. I'm sure it could.
I tried to write bearing its future in mind, so that there might be some chance of it getting done again, because obviously, you know, with narrator to Iranian percussionist, percussion ensemble, and symphony orchestra and 60 school kids, that's the combination that probably won't get together that often.
I think also David Bruce has been clever enough to make sure that if you don't have all the things, if you don't have an ensemble of DAFs from City University, or you don't have 2 expert Iranian musicians or 50 young violin players, there's still a way of performing the piece. I think we found a piece that we'd be very happy to revive in the future, and I think will have a life beyond it.
But I would hope that they would definitely identify, you know, the experience that they've had and the people they were making music with Iran, and perhaps as they get older and they engage more in kind of current and social affairs and what's going on in the news, that will be for them a really positive memory of things Iranian.
For many, many children in London, and we reach about 15,000 a year, it's their first experiences of hearing and seeing an orchestra. Many might come from families who wouldn't consider taking them to a concert themselves.
It's so important for the parents to see the children performing this kind of space, because it really is like, wow, this is an amazing venue. There's a whole big orchestra here, loads of extra people, and you know, there's my son on stage performing them. It's a very important moment for the parents, and it's great because they get to see their children being successful.
Early in the conversations with Laudan, she mentioned kind of what would be a really nice byproduct for her of the project is the fact that it allows Iranian culture, Persian culture, to come through in a very positive light.